Roger Griffiths here, the publisher of The Hub. Welcome to this day 23 of our 2025 election coverage. I'm in studio with co-founder and editor-at-large Sean Speer. Sean, great to have you here at the proverbial roundtable. We're going to go to Ginny Roth in a moment to catch up on the latest tactics and strategies on the campaign trail. But before we do that, let's get you caught up on what's been happening on the campaign over the last 24 hours. We'll do that by first updating on where the leaders are. Mark Carney's making an announcement in Quebec. Everyone kind of probably staying close to where the next big event will be. That'll be the French language debate coming up soon. Pierre Poilievre, similarly, in La Belle Province in Montreal with an announcement. We'll get to that policy in a moment. And Singh, similarly, debate prep, no doubt, on his mind, make or break for the French language debate on Wednesday for the NDP leader. In terms of what we're seeing out of the policy platforms of the parties as we go into the debate, the Liberals coming out with a promise for more efficient and effective defense procurement, more investment in the Canadian military. We'll continue to track that with our experts here at the Hub over the coming days. The Conservatives are in Quebec with their announcement on fraud busting attacks on seniors. So a kind of message focused on that key voting group of boomers. Singh out with pledges on nursing to deal with the nursing shortage in Canada. Well, let's go to Ginny Roth, bring her into the program to talk about the latest news in the campaign. Ginny, great to have you on the program.
It's good to be back, guys.
I've got to start with you, Ginny, with the remarks in the last 24 hours by Premier Doug Ford, coming out and wholeheartedly endorsing, embracing his campaign manager, Corey Teneycke, and his Teneycke's very sharp comments about the Poilievre campaign, how it's being run, and his predictions that a trail of misery lies ahead between now and the end of the month. What did you make of the Premier deciding to weigh in?
Well, my feeling yesterday upon seeing his comments was I was disappointed as a conservative. I mean, that yesterday, Polyev had this, I think, really compelling announcement on using the notwithstanding clause to make sure that people who commit murder get actual life sentences for all the murders they commit. Great policy announcement for a bunch of reasons. Really, I think, compelling for the broadest version of conservative supporters and highly motivating for them. Also, an excellent wedge. Both Carney and Singh came out opposing, creating the perfect contrast where the right number of voters were fall side of the issue that you want. So it was a great day. I was really pleased with the message and the announcement. And then to see the premier basically step on that and kind of like muddy the message day for Poilievre. It is, I'll just call it what it is actively undermining and hurting the chance of conservative success in the federal election. And even if you put aside, the tribalism of your own team and wanting your own team to win, like for a lot of people, this is a really high stakes election that has nothing to do with partisan politics and
Yes.
everything to do with the direction of our country. And to put that at risk because of personal sore feelings or whatever other issues are at play, I think is just like totally inappropriate and uncalled for. So I was disappointed for that reason. I would also say, I think the strategy diagnosis of both Mr. Teneycke and the premier is incorrect. The premier in his election, first of all, the premier went to an election trying to win a ton more seats, and he did not. So, in terms of the bar for his success, I don't know that he met it. Second of all, the premier was the premier. He benefited from the rally around the flag effect in the Trump context, and to suggest that Poilievre would be able to do the same as the opposition leader is, I think, just totally incorrect misread of the environment. And so, I can't speak to people's hearts or motivations, and so I won't. All I can speak to is the results, and the results are that at a crucial time in the election for the Conservatives, where nationally I think they could still pull it off, you have a conservative premier actively undermining that.
Yeah, Sean, what did you think? I mean, it was a day where we were reporting on polls showing maybe a bit of momentum to the Conservative campaign, numbers ticking up, Carney falling off. And I wondered if it was just coincidence that the premier decided to, take his big booted foot out and put it on the neck of the Poilievre campaign to squash what was looking like a positive news cycle vis-a-vis renewed momentum and energy on the Conservative campaign.
Yeah, I think it was the first day of our daily show when Ginny said that the goal of any campaign is to win as many days as possible. And as you both have said, there's a lot of evidence that the Conservatives were winning yesterday and had strung together a series of days in a row that looked more positive than it had been in the previous ones. And so for the premier to intervene and weigh into questions of personnel and political strategy and all the rest is highly unbecoming. But it reflects a pattern from Doug Ford. Don't forget, he has directed his ire towards the Conservative campaign and his affirmation for Mark Carney, who he's talked about in glowing terms, really ever since Carney first became prime minister. I think Doug Ford probably has to be a bit careful, Roger. He has a complicated relationship with Conservatives in this country. I think they mostly tolerate him, but privately are pretty critical of the kind of unrevolving record of his government. If in the end the federal party is defeated, the sense that he has, in a way, both with yesterday's intervention, but more generally for his support for Mark Carney, that he's contributed, I think it will do real damage, lasting damage for him in the world of conservative politics.
Mm-hmm. Just have a little more fun with this, Jenny. Is this, some people getting ahead of themselves and basically trying to litigate a hypothetical reality of a post-election defeat for the Conservatives and then a battle for control over what's left of the party? This kind of feels to me a bit, Ginny, like some people here in Ontario are pre-positioning themselves to say, look, we told you so, and now we're the best suited to tell you what you should do next.
That could be. Like I said, I think it's hard to speculate as to people's motivations, but they are motivated by something. And what I can say is there's no way that the people actively undermining the campaign are motivated, as they sometimes say, by the desire for the campaign to succeed, because obviously they're not having that effect. That's clear to anyone observing what's going on. And so yeah, look, people are always jockeying in politics, usually to their own advantage or attempting to their own advantage. But that's why I think it's important to get at the substance of their actual critique, and explain why it's incorrect. It is true that on the Trump issue, Mark Carney is appealing to Canadians for highly emotive, I think, mostly irrational or not rationally driven or rationally motivated reasons.
Yes.
And I think it's also true that Poilievre had a strategic imperative to defensively position himself on the Canada-US dynamic in order to make sure he wasn't bleeding too many voters. I think he did that. I think that's why you saw him give his speech in Toronto on the Canada-US dynamic. He speaks very openly about how he would respond to Trump's provocations. But it is also true, per Daryl Bricker, who I think has spoken to this at length on this very program, that on cost of living and on economy, Poilievre and the Conservatives are the strongest, and that is the territory in which they will win. And so, Poilievre, I noticed his podium sign yesterday had the word change in very large letters on it. And I think that is basically the imperative of the remaining 10 days or 9 days of the campaign, is to just drive the change question on matters of the economy, on cost of living, are you better off? The classic question, are you better off today than you were a few years ago? The answer to that for most Canadians is no. And that is the territory on which Poilievre's going to win the election, and it's the territory on which he's been prosecuting it. And so I think the diagnosis is incorrect. And should we have the misfortune of a Conservative loss on election day, first of all, the terms of that loss are important, right? If Poilievre achieves a popular vote that is higher than even the Stephen Harper high watermark in the 2011 majority, and the Liberals somehow win because of the consolidation of the left, that will be a complicated result that is not, I think, interpretable purely as a loss. I don't want to look. Governing is governing, and there's a zero-sum element to that. But those dynamics will still be impressive, frankly, for the entire modern history of the current party, the Conservative Party, as it currently stands. And the question of and the conversation about how conservatives should thus behave going forward, I think it would be so misguided to suggest that what conservatives need to do is somehow poll every day and try to respond to the emotional feelings of Canadians in that moment. I think that would be a real departure from what I want to see from conservatives.
I think that's
Um,
called populism, Ginny. I don't think that's
yeah,
called
yeah,
conservatism. Doug Ford's
I
a
think that's right.
master
Yeah.
at it. Sean, over to you.
Yeah, I would just say the other thing to keep in mind, I mentioned earlier that Ford's relationship with conservatism and conservatives is complicated. Whatever one thinks of Pierre Poilievre and his ability or inability to reach beyond the conservative base, his relationship to the conservative base is rock solid. And that has been evidenced in these
Yes.
extraordinary rallies that we've had all over the
Yeah.
country. There is not a conservative politician in this country in my lifetime that has animated
That's
conservatives
right.
more than Pierre Poilievre. And so whatever the motivation behind these critiques is as Ginny says, the notion that Doug Ford represents a better alternative strikes me nationally as just completely implausible, precisely because Poilievre has over a lifetime built this relationship with conservative voters in the country, and he's going to get them out in large numbers. The real question moving forward, irrespective of this outcome, is how do you continue to build on that base? And I think Poilievre's got a theory of the case. Doug Ford has a theory of the case. No doubt others do. And, as Jenny says, let's have this conversation in the months and years to come.
Mm-hmm. Ginny, is there an argument, though, that Corey Teneycke is making that just demonstrably Canadians like the kind of bread and circuses approach of Doug Ford? They don't like to be told particularly difficult things. They like their cake and eat it too. You pick your metaphor. He's pursued this form of politics, a kind of politics of everything for everybody all the time. It's incurred big debts and deficits in Ontario, taxes up, lots of things that conservatives inherently wouldn't like. But boy, it has been popular. So is there a message there to the Conservative Party, either during this campaign or after, that there's just a reality of what Canadians like, and what they like is something much closer to the Fordist kind of view of big C conservatism versus what the National Party has had on offer the last couple of years?
I guess that is just not my view of the purpose of political leadership. Um, Canadians are, I think political leadership means that you can get a read on where Canadians stand, but you can also influence where Canadians stand. There are ways, that first of all, there are a lot of dynamics going on in Ontario. Weak opposition parties. I would argue a very weak mainstream media and press gallery,
Yes.
and basically a low accountability environment. Um, and I think Premier Ford, to give him credit, has, from a campaign strategy perspective, if you want to maximize seats in that environment, run campaigns that very few people pay attention to and sort of fly under the radar. Um, and that has worked for him if the goal has been to win the most seats. And when campaign managers are given a mandate, often it is to win the most seats. But political leaders and political leaderships and political parties over the long term have a mandate that's different from that. Their mandate is to win in order to pursue a preferred policy agenda, and to make Canada better, to make whatever province you're running in better. And so on that basis, I think many conservatives, to Sean's point, nationally, they don't just want to win. They want to win to pursue a better policy environment, to make Canada a better place, to make people's wages more powerful, so that they can live a better life and have better outcomes. There is a kind of like common good conservatism element to what I'm describing, and I think a lot of Canadians want that. And I want to see political parties on the right strive for that, to win, not just as an end in of itself, but to win in order to pursue a better mandate.
Yeah, well said, Jenny. It's always so thoughtful when you join us. Let's shift the conversation just as we wrap up in the final minutes to ask for your views about this week's debates. I don't think we'll talk to you again until next week. Why don't you just set them up for our audience? What do you think the big questions are looming over the debates? How will we ultimately score them?
Sure. So I think Poilievre has a goal which is to exploit, or exploit's the wrong word, to expose rather Mark Carney's glaring contradictions. To me, that looks like talking about pipelines and natural resource extraction, where we think voters who are interested and curious about Mark Carney want to believe that he'll be pro major project, pro development. I think Poilievre has to expose that he's not.
Yeah.
He has to do that in a way that doesn't increase his own negatives by looking like too much of a pit bull. But I think he can do it in a matter of fact prosecutorial manner. The other thing that I'm going to be looking for, and I think Carney's imperative is to just get out alive, right? Try to make the debate as sort of low key as possible, and it's basically been his mandate for the whole election campaign is just try to squeak through as unnoticed as possible. Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet are actually the two more important people, I think, on this stage. For Singh, he has to remind Canadians that a vote for an NDP MP sends more NDP MPs to Parliament to hold whatever government wins accountable. I think if he can deliver that message and give a few more voters a bit more permission to vote NDP, that will have been a huge success for him, and he could outperform the way he's been on the campaign so far. And if Blanchet can remind Quebec voters basically of the same thing, that if they elect a Bloc MP, they can hold the government accountable to account. I think each one of them can be sort of pragmatic in their approach and potentially earn a point or two extra going into the campaign, which could be a real difference maker for them in terms of how many seats they're able to win.
Hey, Ginny, thanks so much. Let's do a big debate debrief with you early next week. And just to all of our listeners out there, sorry, I'm getting my hats confused. The Hub has a debate night party here downtown Toronto. Send us an email to editorial@thehub if you want to come and join us Thursday night to watch the leaders debate. We'll squeeze you in. Almost sold out, but it should be fun for all of us to gather. Beer and popcorn. You have to have beer and popcorn if you're watching a political debate, at least according to Scott Reed. Thanks, Ginny. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Sean, a real pleasure now to welcome on the program someone who I've consistently gone to try to understand the real estate market here, especially in the GTA, but across Canada. He has a hugely successful podcast. He's been in this business for decades as a storied mortgage broker. And he's going to talk to us about what I think could be a big sleeper issue that's not being discussed in the campaign and could land in the lap of the next federal government, and that is the meltdown in condos, their values, their sales volumes that's happening right now in the GTA, also in Vancouver and other markets. And he is Ron Butler, the host, the founder of the Angry Mortgage Broker. Ron, great to have you on the program.
Oh, listen, thanks for having me.
Tell us, Ron, your analysis, why you think the condo market in Toronto is shortly, imminently, due for something very, very ugly.
It's a really phenomenal price mistake. So we had people, many people, thousands and tens of thousands of people buying condos in 2019, 2020, 2021, that were incredibly higher priced on a pre-construction basis than the condo that was sitting across the street from the hole in the ground that was going to be turned into that condo. We're talking about 40% higher price. And yet they were sold. There was a basic belief that condo prices could go up forever, rents could go up forever, somewhat reminiscent of Dutch tulips 450 years ago. There's actually a similarity. I mean, the only reason you believe that the price would go up is that the price did go up in the past. So now all the chickens have come home to roost. There's tens of thousands of units coming on stream, completing over the next 22 months. Prices are falling. The people who can't afford to close, they were so counting on being able to sell it by assignment or to rent it easily at a very, very high rent, all of which has turned out to be wrong. Rents are actually falling in the GTA. They're falling in parts of the Lower Mainland. They will continue to fall. We have the highest inventory of condos listed for sale. I don't know, the history of history, maybe. I mean, it's just it's a monumental number that keeps going up, except for the people who give up and, just I don't know what they're going to do, whether they're going to give, their keys back somewhere. I have no answer, but it just is a classic pricing mistake that is of an order of magnitude frightening. It's like it's 30,000 to 40,000 units in the
Wow.
next 22 months.
The bubble is popping, and Sean, I think it's fascinating to think about the implications of that to policymakers because, for you to continue the conversation on with Ron, I think for him to hear some of your thoughts about where the heck policymakers go from here. How do they respond to basically a market that's popped, prices plunging, builders on strike? Ron, I'm sure, can share some thoughts on how slow new starts are right now.
Yeah, well, just to that point, Ron, for those of us who don't think about these issues as much as you do, just help us understand if one starts, as I think one usually ought to, that business people and investors are rational. What explains this supply-demand disequilibrium? What are the factors that caused it?
Well, if we think about the people who were buying these units, they weren't business people. They were just mom and pop who had done well on a condo they bought 10 years ago and it had gone well. Or it's the nephew of an uncle who said he made a fortune on condos buying them pre-construction 10 years ago. These aren't savvy business people by and large. And there is also some impact, although very, very limited now, of foreign capital in the marketplace. But I think what's really disconcerting is nobody's building anything in Ontario except some institutional government buildings, a bit of commercial, some stores are being built, some grocery stores are being built. Walmart and Loblaws is expanding. But this is also the highest level of commercial units for sale, like buildings for sale, warehouses for sale. Again, in the history of Ontario, there's like hundreds and hundreds of listings of commercial buildings. I think there were 3 sales so far this year. That's it. And the famous stories of the cranes in Toronto. There were more construction cranes in Toronto
Any city in the world.
Yeah, than all the 5 U.S. cities put together. Okay, some of that has to do with the fact we do double crane system, but it's all over. There were about 93 sales offices to sell pre-construction condos opened in the last 15 months. They all closed. There were not sufficient pre-construction sales to even consider opening the site.
Ron, I want our audience to understand just how big this is, because you're talking tens of thousands of units priced anywhere from, I don't know, $1,300-1,400 a square foot up to $1,700-1,800 a square foot. So we're talking about billions, tens of billions of dollars in real estate that is flooding onto the market. The people that now have to close on these condos have to come up with basically 3/4 of the purchase price, or maybe not exactly that, but a heck of a lot of money to close on the deal, or they have to walk away and lose their deposit. So, Ron, tell us the tale of two cities. The people that walk away, I assume that maybe they didn't just have one pre-sale. They might have had multiple pre-sales, maybe tied to their HELOC on their house. Maybe they financed it out of their principal residence, that initial down payment. So what the heck happens to those people, and what's the contagion risk to the broader economy? And then the developers, Ron, that's the other tale I want to hear from you. What do they do? Because they now have, I guess, people handing these pre-sales back to them. Do they just flood the market with this inventory? Can they hold it back? Tell us the tale of two cities here.
Well, we have a saying in our business that nobody ever just bought one pre-construction condo. I mean, it's the norm to buy more than one. But let's break down those two subjects. So the subject of scrambling to try to close and coming up with the money, when in fact, often on an independent appraisal, when you independently appraise that new construction property, it comes in 20% less or more than the purchase price that you acquired it for 6 years ago. So that poses its own set of problems in terms of getting a mortgage. The next question becomes walking away. We have a general estimate, just a crude estimate, because you will never, ever get this information from builders, ever, who's walking away. We have a crude estimate of between 20 and 30% of all of these new condos. That's on the rise. That's from about 6 months ago. It was about 10 to 15, so it's gone up significantly. Of people just walking away. They say, "Hey, Mr. Developer, keep my deposit. I'm leaving." And it's a dichotomy about who sues who, because you are entitled to sue. You are entitled to do complete enforcement of that contract. And some developers are litigating, and some developers aren't. They're just going to quietly eventually try to sell those unclosed condos into the public at much lower prices. Now, they have to pause for a few months because it doesn't look good that as their people who bought 6 years ago are closing, that they're offering the same size unit for 25% less. So they're going to wait until everything's quieted down. But that's the only rational answer, that they would attempt to sell those properties at a discount.
Wow, as you both have said, what an issue that's gone unaddressed or unnoticed in a major election campaign. Ron, before we let you go, I have to ask about Mark Carney's major housing announcement in this election. He's committed to the government essentially getting into the business of building homes. What's your reaction? Is this going to help, or is it going to actually make things worse in your mind?
Well, I guess the first question anyone should ask is, when was the last time you heard somebody say, "I'm just dying to live in government housing"? I really want to get that government housing. Yeah, get me that. I don't hear that from any human that I have encountered. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is the goal of the 500,000 units is ridiculous, unless 120,000 of them are going to be tents. The Liberal leader has suggested that it could be modular homes. We don't have anything like that manufacturing capacity in Canada, not even close. Like I do this stuff for a living. And typically all modular homes are slightly more expensive than the traditionally built homes. So the claims about ramping it up hugely, the whole idea of building, we hear a lot of that from the current prime minister. Building, we're going to build a lot of stuff. You need private enterprise to build stuff. The kind of capital required to build half a million homes a year is off the charts, and it can only be achieved through banks and private capital building those homes, and that's where the skill sets are. So to get to 500,000, we listened to the story for basically 9 years that there would be 3 million additional homes by 2031. This year we'll build about 225.
Yeah.
And that was the promise, was to get about to 500,000 or 400,000 for 9 years. Never happened. Never even came close. So the idea that modular is going to do it, I can honestly tell you, it makes no sense.
Yeah. Ron, last question. If we're right and there's going to be just a massive wave of wealth destruction that washes across, the single largest asset class in Canada, which is real estate, because these tens of thousands of units are going to dump onto the market. They're going to plunge rents. They're going to, as you say, contaminate and create contagion in single family detached and attached homes, because people had used their HELOCs to finance these condos, which are now worth 30 or 40% less than when they bought them. Does government respond to this, Ron? Or is the problem simply too big? I guess what I worry always, Ron, is that that famous phrase, we're from the government and we're here to help. Give us a sense here, any concerns that we could be on the verge here of a massive bailout to try to plug this hole in the economy?
That's a good question that we've thought about a lot, myself and others in the industry. And the reality is there probably will be something. But the other true thing is it will be on a discounted basis. And what it will likely be is just taking over some units or even some buildings that eventually, because that 30% failure rate can absolutely rise to 60. And once it gets past 50, you can't close the condominium corporation. That's the rules of the province. So they'll turn into rentals. They'll turn into some sort of
Public
rental
housing?
product.
Could the government just buy them and convert them into public housing?
The government could take them out of receivership as a discount. That's always a possibility. But they could also be resold. I mean, the government could take the units out of receivership on a temporary basis, rent them for a while, and eventually sell them. They might even get out with their money intact. There is just a likelihood that something will happen. I mean, it's just too big a bunch of numbers. The numbers are too large. And eventually somebody's going to stop and say, well, wait a second. We got 15,000 units just sitting empty. They're empty. Maybe we should do something about that. So there will be some kind of pressure will build.
Yeah. Well, listeners, viewers, please check out Ron's podcast. It's fantastic. The Angry Mortgage Broker. He's a little more salty on his podcast than he's been on air with us today. So I enjoy it. And Ron, thank you. You're a real national treasure when it comes to trying to understand real estate. Appreciate you coming on the show. Let's do it again.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Sean, I think this is a big sleeper in the campaign. Nobody is talking about it. Ron has 30 plus years in the business. It's not just him, it's real estate lawyers and others that are starting to come out and say what none of the developers want you to hear, which is that tens of thousands of units, just think about that, okay? Priced at anywhere from $1,400 to $1,800 a square foot, running 400 to 1,000 square feet in mainland BC and the GTA, the two big economic centers of the country, are basically going on fire sale. And rents are plunging. The values of these units are plunging. People are refusing to go forward and close on these deals. I hate to, add woes and troubles to everything that the country faces right now. But I think that real estate bubble that everyone had been talking about over the last decade, it's popping. And it's popping right now. And the next government's going to inherit this problem.
Yeah, well, credit to you for profiling this issue. I must admit it's not something that I've been following closely. And I suspect a lot of our listeners and viewers find it a bit dichotomous. Like on one hand, what have we been talking about for the past 2 or 3 years, Roger? The lack of housing supply in the country, right? I mean,
now there's massive supply.
Precisely. So when I ask about Carney's proposal, and essentially says we have such a supply problem that the market has failed to produce sufficient supply that we need to move into Soviet style housing. And so for Ron to say, well, actually, the real issue, the issue underpinning all of this is precisely the opposite. I think is one of the challenges, Rudyard, having spent time in Ottawa in government and politics, is that politics often lags what's happening in the real economy. And so Ottawa's just got its head around this idea that we have a housing supply problem. And the political parties are competing over who can boost housing supply. I worry that no one in Ottawa is prepared for this completely different problem that is going to challenge the way that they've come to think about it, if I can put it that way.
And make their solutions largely obsolete, because builders will go on strike.
Yes.
Because you have the bizarre situation of an absolute surfeit of supply. Supply is no longer the issue. There's going to be tens of thousands of unsold units whose property values are going down, making it very attractive actually for a lot of people to now enter into the housing market. In some ways, the market is solving the problem through what the market does, which is, price destruction of an asset. So you're right, the whole government toolkit is going to have to change. And I think, one, they're going to have to figure out how to encourage builders to actually start building now so that there's new inventory when we need it 5-6 years from now. Right now, builders are on strike. And second, I think Ron's right. Some kind of bailout is going to come, because it'll, I think, be too tempting politically and otherwise for the economy, the effects on the economy, to allow our largest asset class to undergo a significant re-rating of value. That said, I think we have something like $5 trillion worth of real estate in this country. If that corrects by 20, 30, 40%, that's a hole that's bigger than any government's balance sheet and the ability of anyone to plug that. Well, a fascinating show. I'm glad we got that segment on. What we try to do here at our daily show is profile some new issues. So let's say goodbye to our on-demand viewers and on-demand listeners who've been tuning into this podcast on YouTube and on our podcast channel. Note that we do broadcast this show live to air every day at 10 a.m. Eastern in the morning. You can join Sean and me and our other experts to weigh in on the big issues of the campaign. But we also encourage our friends who've been part of the chat for the last 40 minutes or so to stick around, because as soon as I say goodbye to our on-demand listeners and viewers, we're going to say hello to our friends on the chat and answer some of their questions. So here's that bye-bye.